My uncle stole every cent my parents left me, kicked me out, and left me to rot in a group home. He told people she thought she was owed something just because her parents were rich. People like that don't last. A few years later, I came back with a new name, millions in my account, and a plan to destroy him from the inside. I was 14 when everything changed. The morning of the will reading, the lawyer's office smelled like old paper and lemon polish. I sat on the leather couch with my hands clenched so tightly in my lap, my nails dug into my skin. My whole world had ended 5 days earlier in a car crash that took both my parents. And now, here I was, surrounded by people in dark clothes, pretending to care. I remember Uncle Fred sitting beside me, his heavy cologne choking the air around him. He was my dad's younger brother, louder, rougher, always a little too eager when it came to family business. But he was all I had left. A tragic loss, he said to the lawyer, shaking his head solemnly. Truly. My brother was a good man. We'll do what's best for Maya, of course. I didn't look at him. I couldn't. The lawyer, a tall man with thick glasses and a voice like gravel, cleared his throat and opened a thick folder. According to the terms of the will, Maya's parents left behind their home, 2 cars, stocks, and a trust fund totaling $3.2 million. My breath caught. $3.2 million? They've left instructions that Maya's trust fund is to be managed until she turns 25. In the meantime, her legal guardian will handle her financial needs with guidance from the trust's oversight committee. Legal guardian? I asked, my voice cracking. Who's that? The lawyer looked up. Your father appointed his brother, Fred, as your guardian. Uncle Fred patted my knee like he'd just won the lottery. Don't worry, kiddo. I'll take care of you. Like family should. That's when I knew something was wrong. I didn't have the words for it then, but my gut screamed. Fred smiled wide, but there was a flicker in his eyes. Greed. Maybe even triumph. The first week at his house was fine. Cold, but fine. He lived with his wife, Aunt Valerie, and their 2 boys, Kenny and Bryce, who never looked me in the eye. They weren't cruel, just distant. Like I was a guest that had overstayed her welcome. But things went downhill fast. By week 2, I was eating alone. Fred locked the door to my room every morning while I was at school. He canceled my extracurriculars and took away my laptop. I'm tightening the budget, he said when I asked. You don't need all that fancy crap. You're not a princess. 3 weeks later, he sat me down and told me the trust was gone. What do you mean it's gone? I asked, heart pounding. Well, not gone. Just redirected, he said, swirling whiskey in a glass. You're young. That kind of money needs proper handling. I've taken over your finances, and the trust committee agreed. I didn't know what to say. I barely understood what was happening. My parents' money was supposed to keep me safe, pay for college, help me build a life. Now it was tied up in Uncle Fred's accounts. And then came the worst day of all. I came home from school one Friday, and all my things were packed into 2 garbage bags on the porch. What's going on? I asked, panic rising in my chest. Fred stepped out the front door, arms crossed. You're not living here anymore. What? Why? You're ungrateful. You cost too much. And frankly, Val's sick of having you around. So, I've arranged for you to be placed in a government facility. It's what your kind needs. Structure. He tossed a folder at my feet. It was a court order. He'd had me declared unmanageable. A ward of the state. I stood there in the cold, staring at the home I grew up in, the place where my parents once tucked me into bed, and I realized no one was coming to save me. No goodbyes. No hugs. Not even a last look from Fred or Valerie. It was like I was never there. The group home was located in the city outskirts. Gray walls, metal fences, security cameras. They called it Hope Haven, but hope was the one thing you wouldn't find there. Inside, the air buzzed with tension. The staff were exhausted. The kids were angry. Some didn't talk at all. Others talked too much, usually about pain. That first night, I cried myself to sleep with my coat rolled under my head, pretending it was my mother's lap. I kept replaying Fred's words. You cost too much. Val's sick of having you around. Like I was trash. disposable. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I buried the rage. I folded it neatly like a letter and tucked it deep inside. Someday, I would open it again. The next few months passed in a blur of school, therapy sessions, and dodging fights. I kept my head down. I didn't make friends. Not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't trust anyone. My only escape was the computer lab. The machines were old and slow, but they worked. I would finish my schoolwork fast so I could stay behind and play with code. HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, words that gave me structure, rules, logic. Unlike the rest of my life. One day, I stumbled across a free coding bootcamp on YouTube. I started following tutorials, building ugly websites and tiny games. It made me feel powerful, like I could create something no one could take from me. By 16, I'd built my first app. It was a basic homework tracker. It didn't go viral or anything, but it worked. That's when I realized I was good at this. Really good. But survival wasn't just about skill. It was about patience. So I waited, and learned, and built. Quietly. While Fred used my inheritance to buy a boat and renovate his kitchen, I was teaching myself how to code, how to invest, and how to win. By the time I turned 18, the state officially released me. No cake, no celebration. Just a stack of papers, and a warning not to get in trouble. I left with a second-hand laptop, a prepaid phone, and $327 in a dusty envelope. But I also had something more valuable, a plan. Over the next 3 years, I built my empire in silence. I worked 3 jobs. Cleaned floors. Waited tables. Did tech support remotely at night. Any spare hour, I coded. One day, while scrolling through tech forums at 2 a.m., I stumbled across a post from a woman named Elise, a UX designer who offered mentorships to women in tech. I took a deep breath and messaged her. Hi Elise, my name is Maya. I'm self-taught and struggling to find my place in this industry. I don't have connections or a degree, but I learn fast. I'd be so grateful for any advice or guidance. I didn't expect a reply. She answered the next morning. We jumped on a call that weekend. She liked my ideas, my scrappiness, my hunger. She became my first mentor. She introduced me to people who didn't care about my past. She showed me how to pitch, how to build products that solve real problems, how to fake confidence until it becomes real. She changed everything. At 21, I launched a mobile app called Flickit, an event-based networking tool that connected creatives in real time. It started slow, but then a TikTok influencer used it at a music festival, and overnight we got 10,000 users. Then came the angel investors, seed funding, a co-founder, a tiny, cramped office downtown. By 24, I was CEO of a company valued at $12 million. People called me a prodigy. People love a success story. They see the glow up, the money, the polished shoes, and the press releases. They love the story after you've made it, when it's all shiny and clean. But they never want to hear about the nights you went hungry. About washing your only pair of jeans in a gas station sink. About watching other kids buy Starbucks with their parents' money while you calculate whether you can afford bread and data. My glow-up started in the dark. I moved into a windowless basement in the bad part of town. The walls were covered in mold. My landlord didn't care, as long as I paid in cash. I lived off instant noodles and peanut butter, slept in a borrowed sleeping bag, and showered at a gym I joined for $10 a month. Every morning, I walked to a cafe that opened early and asked to sweep their floors in exchange for leftover muffins. I got hired part-time. Then I picked up another shift at a corner store. Then I found remote gigs online doing basic websites for local salons and restaurants. I never told anyone my real story. If people asked, I said my parents moved overseas, that I was saving for school, that I liked working hard. Lies tasted better than pity. But I never forgot where I came from. And I never forgot Fred. He thought I'd disappear. Instead, I was coming back. Smarter, richer, stronger. And I had every intention of watching him beg. I Googled him one night. Fred now owned a chain of auto shops. His company, FNV Auto Solutions, had recently laid off 20 employees after a failed expansion. There were whispers of debt. His oldest son, Kenny, was arrested for DUI. His wife, Valerie, was seen arguing with him in public at a gala. Poor Fred. It was the perfect time. I spent the next 6 months building a new identity. Her name was Layla James, an independent investor, low profile, discreet. I created LinkedIn accounts, business websites, fake testimonials. I even paid a friend to build her a digital trail, conference appearances, articles, professional headshots. Layla was elegant, respected, and completely fictional. But most importantly, she had money. And Fred needed money. I reached out under Layla's name with a simple message. Dear Mr. Frederick Allen, I've been following your company's growth in the automotive industry and would love to discuss a potential partnership. I admire your resilience and your commitment to local service. Are you available for a brief call next week? He responded in less than 2 hours. Absolutely. Let's talk. Just like that, the man who stole my future invited me into his life again. This time, he had no idea who I really was. But I knew exactly who he was. And I was going to burn his whole world down one lie at a time. The first call with Fred took 27 minutes. Long enough to confirm what I already suspected. He was desperate. He answered the Zoom call from a cluttered office, wearing a cheap suit and the same arrogant smirk I remembered from the day he threw me out. He hadn't aged well. Hair thinning, eyes tired, voice trying too hard to sound important. Layla. So glad you reached out, he said, leaning forward like we were old friends. I don't usually take cold calls, but I liked your message. You've got initiative. I smiled, keeping my voice low and professional. I'm glad to hear that, Mr. Allen. Your company has a lot of potential. I'm especially interested in your regional service model. There's scalability there. He lit up at the word scalability. It was like feeding candy to a child. I've always said that. You wouldn't believe how many investors don't see it. I do, I said. I'm not like most investors. And just like that, the hook was in. Over the next month, I kept playing the role of Layla James, the polished investor with a mysterious past and deep pockets. I told Fred I worked with a silent partner, someone who liked funding underdogs with strong ideas but weak infrastructure. He bought every word. I used burner phones, fake email domains, and VPNs to make sure nothing could trace back to Maya. I even wore a wig on video calls, sleek black bob, cat-eye glasses, and minimal makeup. I looked nothing like the girl he abandoned. Fred introduced me to his team as a strategic consultant. I laughed the first time he said that off camera. Me? Consulting him? He had no idea he'd hired the daughter of the man he robbed. Asked for access to his financials. He gave it without blinking. And oh, it was worse than I thought. The company was bleeding money. Bad loans. Overpriced inventory. Sketchy side deals that skirted legal lines. And on top of that, Fred had been funneling company funds into personal expenses, vacations, golf memberships, even a plastic surgery deposit for his wife. I compiled everything. I took screenshots, saved PDFs, recorded calls. It wasn't just revenge anymore, it was justice. One day, I asked Fred about his family. Just to twist the knife. He leaned back, sighing like a tired father in a sitcom. Kenny's still trying to find his path, he said. Smart boy, just distracted. And Bryce? He's into music now. Wants to be a DJ or something. Kids these days. And your niece? I asked, sipping coffee. He blinked. My niece. Maya. He scratched his head. Oh, yeah. Haven't heard from her in years. She ran off after her parents passed. Couldn't handle structure. Sad, really. I forced myself to smile. Must be. He went on, completely unaware that he was speaking to the very person he erased. She never appreciated what we did for her. Gave her a roof, food. But she had attitude. Thought she was owed something just because her parents were rich. People like that? They don't last. I stared at him, my heart pounding. You stole everything. You ruined my life. And now you think I didn't last? 2 weeks later, I staged a business retreat, and invited Fred and his family to a luxury resort on Layla's dime. It was bait, and he bit hard. The goal? Get them relaxed, comfortable, off guard. That weekend, I watched them from behind tinted sunglasses as they swam, drank, laughed. Valerie flaunted her new nose job. Kenny flirted with hotel staff. Fred strutted around like he owned the place. They had no idea the woman sipping champagne across the pool was the same girl who once cried herself to sleep in a government shelter. The final spark came that night at dinner. Fred pulled me aside, glass of wine in hand. "You know, Layla," he said, slurring slightly, "I've met a lot of people in this game. You're different. Sharp. Classy. You remind me of someone I used to know." "Oh," I asked. "Who?" "My brother's wife. Maya's mom. Smart woman. Beautiful, too. Shame what happened. Car crash took 'em both. Broke the girl. She was never the same. But hey, some people just aren't built to survive." I set down my wine glass carefully. "That's true," I said. "But others? They survive. And remember." He laughed, not catching the weight in my words. I walked away that night with a plan forming like wildfire in my mind. It was time to stop pretending. It was time to break him from the inside. The real revenge didn't start with a bang. It started with a spreadsheet. While Fred toasted to new beginnings with a cocktail in hand, I was sitting in my suite, mapping out the anatomy of his downfall. Every invoice, every fraudulent expense, every missed payment, I laid them out like puzzle pieces. I didn't want to just hurt him. I wanted to unravel him. From the inside out. The first thing I did was target his weaknesses, money and ego. Fred was running low on both. So I offered to help restructure F&B Auto Solutions with a fresh infusion of capital, $500,000, through a fake company I registered under a shell name. Of course, that money didn't come from me. It was a decoy, an illusion of wealth designed to lure him into overreach. I told him to expand. Open 2 new locations. Rebrand. Go big. He agreed without hesitation. But I had access to the bank now. Every transaction. Every hidden debt. I quietly inflated his operational costs and redirected vendor payments to fake shell accounts. Not enough to raise alarms, but enough to create tension. He thought the company was growing. It was bleeding. Meanwhile, I deepened my role. Layla became the face of innovation at F&B. Fred started relying on me more. He invited me to board meetings, pitched ideas to me, even asked for help with his speech at a Chamber of Commerce event. He never questioned it. He never suspected that the woman sitting beside him with a calm smile and poised notebook had once slept on a concrete floor because of him. And I made sure he paid for every second. I leaked his tax discrepancies to a local journalist. Anonymously, of course. The article ran 2 weeks later under the headline, "Auto Empire Under Fire. Financial Misconduct Allegations Surface at F&B." Fred lost it. He called a staff meeting and yelled for 30 minutes straight. People were nervous. Clients backed out. One investor walked. But I stayed calm. I told him to hold the course. I pretended to double down with him while I whispered fears into the ears of the board. Is Fred mentally fit to lead? Maybe it's time for a transition. We need fresh leadership, someone discreet and capable. They agreed. And just like that, Fred started losing control of the one thing he valued most. I leaked his tax discrepancies to a local journalist. Anonymously, of course. The article ran 2 weeks later under the headline, "Auto Empire Under Fire. Financial Misconduct Allegations Surface at F&B." Fred lost it. He called a staff meeting and yelled for 30 minutes straight. People were nervous. Clients backed out. One investor walked. But I stayed calm. I told him to hold the course. I pretended to double down with him while I whispered fears into the ears of the board. Is Fred mentally fit to lead? Maybe it's time for a transition. We need fresh leadership, someone discreet and capable. They agreed. And just like that, Fred started losing control of the one thing he valued most. At home, his life wasn't much better. Valerie found out he'd maxed out a joint credit card on one of his business investments, a fake asset deal I'd planted. Kenny totaled a company car while drunk. Bryce dropped out of college to become a TikTok star. And me? I was there, smiling, offering solutions, feeding their egos, while slowly tightening the noose. At one point, Valerie turned to me and said, "You're the daughter Fred never had." I nearly choked, but the moment I knew it was working, it was a Thursday morning. Fred came into the office, and for the first time, he looked tired, truly tired. He sat across from me and rubbed his face with both hands. "I don't get it, Layla. I've done everything right. I built this company from scratch. I've worked my whole life. And now, it's all falling apart." I leaned forward and said, "Maybe it's karma." He looked up sharply. "What?" I smiled. "I mean, the market's unpredictable. You never know what's coming." He chuckled bitterly. "Yeah. Tell me about it." By the end of that week, Fred was under audit. A board meeting was called to discuss leadership restructuring. 2 of his locations were under investigation for labor violations I'd anonymously tipped off. He had no idea the storm was mine, and it was just getting started. I started building the final act of my plan, what I called the collapse. It had 3 phases. 1. Sever his allies. 2. Expose his crimes. 3. Rip off the mask. I started with the allies. Fred's inner circle was small, mostly old men who liked golf, cigars, and getting richer. I targeted the weakest link, James Rowe, an investor and longtime friend of Fred's. He was influential, but also deeply insecure. So I played him. I invited him to a private dinner under the guise of exclusive investment opportunities. I made him feel important like a king. Then I casually mentioned some of the discrepancies I'd noticed in Fred's numbers. He took the bait. Within a week, James withdrew $250,000 from the company and resigned from the board. Fred didn't even know why, and the silence around him began to grow. The media picked up the story next. Another anonymous tip, this time about illegal employee contracts and racial discrimination lawsuits. I made sure journalists got leaked emails, signatures, everything. Fred called me in a panic. "Layla, they're trying to destroy me." I put on my best poker face. "You need a scapegoat. Someone to blame." He nodded quickly. "You're right. Maybe my accountant. Or that operations manager." I watched him scramble. He would throw anyone under the bus. Except himself. A few days later, Fred stood in front of his employees and cried. He blamed the media, the economy, betrayal from within. He said he was stepping down temporarily for the company's sake. He said it like he was doing them a favor. I stood at the back of the room and watched the man who ruined my life pretend to be a hero. No one clapped, not even his sons. After he stepped down, the company floundered. The board was scrambling. Investors were pulling out. Employees were either quitting or whispering behind closed doors. And Fred? He was holed up in his house, sending paranoid messages to every friend he had left. That's when I began phase 2, exposure. I booked a quiet venue for what I called an investor reassurance event. I told Fred it was my way of salvaging what was left of the company, that we could rebuild trust. He eagerly agreed, desperate for anything to fix the damage. I invited press, former employees, and investors under the guise of a rebranding campaign. But really, it was a stage I built for his collapse. The night of the event, the room was dimly lit, elegant, and filled with exactly the kind of people Fred wanted to impress. He walked in wearing a fresh suit, fake confidence, and a wide smile. He didn't know that the presentation file I loaded on the screen behind him wasn't about the future of the company. It was about him. Financial theft, fraudulent filings, misused trust funds, forgery. I had it all. He stood at the podium, clueless, ready to speak. I waited until he finished his grand opening remarks, thanking Layla for her guidance and claiming he was ready to lead again. And then I stepped forward. "Before we move on," I said, my voice calm, "there's something the room deserves to see." The lights dimmed. The screen lit up. Slide by slide, I showed them everything. Emails, bank transfers, contracts with forged signatures, a timeline of the trust fund, my trust fund, vanishing from Maya's account into Fred's. The room was dead silent. And then I spoke, this time with no mask. My name isn't Layla James. Fred froze. I pulled off the wig. My name is Maya Carter. I'm the girl you stole from. The one you threw away. Gasps. Murmurs. Cameras flashing. Fred went pale. I was 17 when you destroyed my life. You didn't just take my money. You took my home, my safety, my family, and you thought I wouldn't survive. I took a step forward. Well, I did. And I built all of this. Every connection, every opportunity, every inch of this company's salvation, just so I could watch you lose what you love most. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. I didn't come back to be saved. I came back to bury you. Security escorted him out. He didn't speak. He didn't fight. For once, he had nothing. The fallout was fast. Lawsuits. Criminal investigations. His wife filed for divorce within the week, took the boys, and disappeared. The board released a statement. The company was restructured, then sold off. Fred was left with nothing. No money. No name. No power. Just silence. I thought I'd feel euphoric. I didn't. Not right away. The high wore off in hours. The applause faded. People moved on. But I didn't. Because the real satisfaction didn't come from the destruction. It came from knowing he saw me, and finally understood who I was. After the night of the reveal, everything moved fast. Too fast. 1 minute, I was standing under the lights, hair down, voice steady, finally showing the world who I was. The next, I was everywhere. Online news. Blogs. Social media. Woman outsmarts uncle who stole her inheritance. Exposes him in viral presentation. Tech CEO revealed as niece of scandal-ridden auto mogul. Modern-day Cinderella story ends in savage corporate takedown. Everyone had an opinion. Some called me a genius. Some called me cold. Some called me a queen. A few, mostly older men who looked a lot like Fred, called me a monster. I ignored them all, because none of them knew what it was like to be forgotten by your own blood. Meanwhile, Fred's world was rotting. He tried to sue. Claimed I manipulated him, that I fabricated documents. But it was too late. I had everything time-stamped and backed up. Emails, records, contracts. My lawyer crushed him in court. He lost everything. And for once, he couldn't worm his way out of it. But that didn't mean the past stopped haunting me. One night, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. I don't know what I did to deserve this. I gave you everything I could. You ruined me. I hope you're happy. It was him. Fred. The man who watched me pack my life into garbage bags and disappear. Now he was asking me to feel sorry for him? I stared at the message for a long time. And then I deleted it. No reply. In the background, Fred continued to fade into obscurity. The last I heard, he was working at a gas station outside Tampa, using a different name. He'd been blacklisted from every financial institution we'd tangled with. No one returned his calls. No one took his side. Not even his sons. Kenny got arrested again. Bryce sold a tell-all story to a gossip blog that went nowhere. Valerie moved to Arizona and never looked back. The entire empire he stole was now a cautionary tale. And I didn't have to lift another finger.